Okay, so first of all, let's take a look and see what happens when we try to go ahead and update the activity from the service. Now, remember I said this is not something we want to do, but I would like to demonstrate kind of what some of the problems with that are. Now, we're starting here. Our initial project is this that service that we've just built, that we've actually implemented our own service running in the background, and we manage the lifetime all directly ourselves. So we're picking up kind of right where we left off. So now, if you want to update the activity from the background, one of the first challenges is, well, how do you get the activity? Right? And even if you could get a reference to the visible activity, well, the visible activity could change at any time. Right? So that's kind of a challenge in of itself. But now, one thing people often will do is that you've got your activity class, and what you end up doing is putting a static member on here that you'll use to kind of hold your current activity. And then what they do is that here in the onCreate method, they go ahead and just store a reference to that. Right, so we set that up, so we've now got a reference to the current activity. And now what we want to do, of course, is be able to update the display. And so if you remember kind of from our original example, where we were doing everything in line, we would just kind of change the value of this default text view. So what you might end up wanting to do is say, well, maybe I'll add a function here that will give me the reference to the text view. Right, so in theory then, I should be able to just basically go to my activity class, call get activity status view, and get a reference to a text view that I might want to update. All right, so let's assume that we can go ahead and do that. All right, so let's switch back here to the service class. Okay, so back in our service class, let's say we have a text view reference that we're going to use to store that view that we want to update. And what we might say then is that, well, down here in our run where we do all the work, we'll just go ahead and grab a reference to that. Right, so ostensibly now I actually have a reference to that view. So what I might want to do then is have some kind of update function that I can call, right? So that maybe after each one of these, I can do something like, say, started, reverse geocoding, and done, that sort of thing. So maybe I'll do is I'll go down here, I'll write a function. Now what we want to be able to do, of course, is actually take that status text view we have there and write out to it. Right, so if we're going to do that, remember that we've got the classic threading problems. Right? Remember we kind of first started talking about threading issues. Well, that activity is running on one thread. I know I'm running on a different thread. So we've got to do all those things about posting and storing the string and all that kind of stuff we have to do when we're going to do cross-thread updates of the UI. Right, so what I'm going to do here then is go back to the top. And I'm just going to declare a variable here I'll call status message. Right, so I've got that. So what I can do down here in my update status is simply say status message equals message. Right, so I've got that there. But now again, here comes the issues about the cross-threading stuff. Right, so what I'll say here is that, well, if I actually have a status view, as long as that's not equal to null, well, then what I'll do is, remember all this stuff, status text view dot post. Right, so that goes and sets with the runnable. And then basically remember that this function will now post out to the appropriate thread for that control. And then we'll run the code inside of our run function here on the appropriate thread for that. So what I can say there then is just status view, set text, and I've got my status message. If you remember that all this stuff should look really familiar because in the beginning when we were trying to do some of the cross-threading stuff, this is very similar code to what we have done when we first started talking about what some of the issues are. Right, so first of all, this code is kind of convoluted. Right, we're writing a lot of code to do something very simple, but we'll see that the problems with it go even further. Let's say now that we have this here, let's just go ahead in our update status. We'll go up here and we'll just say update status, starting. Then we'll say reverse geocoding. And then down here, after we save, we'll say done. All right, so let's go ahead and run this on our emulator. All right, so let's go ahead and click menu, do work. If we watch here, we'll see starting, reverse geocoding, and done. Right, so that certainly seemed like it works, right? So what's the big deal? Right, well, the big deal is this activity could disappear on us at any point. Remember that any changes to the environment will cause that activity to be replaced with a new one. Right? Again, something simple as rotating the device. Right? So let's say here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this again, And then once it starts, I'm going to do Control F12, which actually rotates the emulator, the same as if a user had rotated the device. And let's see what happens with the display when I do that. So we get started. I'm going to do my Control F12 now. And now I rotate the display, and notice what happened. This is a text view, and nothing else. The reason being is that when I rotated this, the activity that was visible was replaced by a new activity. My program, or I should say my service, had a reference to that old activity. So it was actually updating the contents of an activity that was no longer visible. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. The problem is that you got that activity too soon. I'll get it at the very last second before I do something. Again, you never know when the user is going to actually take an action that causes the environment to be reconfigured and causes activities to be recreated. So this is really not a good solution, right? We want to do is use solutions that are intended for being called from the background. So now, as we mentioned, using a toast is a better way to do this, right? The toast messages allow us to just kind of float those messages out there and not be so intrusive to the user. Right, so let's go in here and let's create another update status here. So what I want to do in here, again, is take advantage of toast. Right, so I'll go in here, and I'll say I want to take my toast, declare an instance of it, equals toast.makeToast, make text, excuse me. I need to pass in something to the context. Well, remember, I've got that service reference for that. Whatever message I want to display, so my message, and something about how long I want it to be visible. So that's my length. I'm going to go from there and just say toast.show. Now that seems like that should be good enough. The issue is that if I actually run this code right now and I call that, I'm actually going to get an exception. And the exception will say that attempt to use the toast on a thread that does not have a looper. Right? Remember, a looper basically means it's a message pump thread. It's something that can actually handle like window-based events and other events that we need. So I need to show that on some thread that would let me do that. One thing I could do is I could actually go out there and create that explicitly. We took over in our worker class, the thing we did for the GPS. Remember that if I go up top here, or when I went to get set up and monitor my GPS on a background thread that required a looper, I went out and created this new handler thread and set all that stuff up. Now I could do that again, but that's pretty heavy-handed for something like just showing the toasts that are out there. So in general, a better way for me to do that is to actually take advantage of a looper that might be there. And basically the main looper. Why don't I just take advantage of the one that the program already has set up for the main UI thread, right? It's very valid to use that for this case because I'm interacting with the user, so that seems pretty reasonable. So what I want to do now is inside of this code here where I want to actually do the updates, I'm going to declare an instance of a handler. I just better state it as I declare a reference to a handler. I'm just going to add a function here that just says setup handler. Void setup handler. So all I want to do here is create a handler that's somehow associated with a looper. I'm just going to say underscore handler. I'm going to create a new handler. And when I create the handler, it needs a looper. Well, remember, I've got my service reference here. Right? My service is, remember, again, derived from context, so anything that's available to the context I can get. So if I can go get main looper. And what that does now is that creates an instance of a handler for me that is tied to the main UI thread. Right? So what I can do now is that inside of my run method here, maybe what I'll do is each time I'm running something, I'll just call that setup handler. And that'll go ahead and build that handler for me. And with that, I can now use that handler to post actions out to the main UI thread. Okay, so what I want to do here then is down inside here, I want to say handler.post. Again, I need a runnable. Right, I want to do my work out there. Right, so it's the same sort of thing as that I need a place to store the message so I can post it out to the handler. So I'll do again is here is up in my class. I have a string. So I've got that there. So now down inside here, I can just say status message equals message. Right, grab those two lines to do the toast. Paste those in there. And of course, the one difference is I have to use the status message member field here. So what that'll allow to happen for me now is that each time I call update status and I pass these in, it'll go ahead and store that value and then post to the UI thread and then show the toast for me. Right? So that gives me a much more user-friendly way to do this. So we go ahead and run this guy. Okay, so we go ahead and say menu, do work. And now we see our toast for starting. Reverse geocoding. And then done. One thing to note about that is that I would not normally show that many toasts, just kind of demonstrating what we can do here. You generally want to kind of keep those much more to a minimum. But the key thing to remember there is that we really just needed to run that on some thread that had a looper for us.